Wearing shoes, you're no Ted, man. You're no Ted.
You really want me to kick off the shoes? I got everything ready.
Wants to get you a stress mat?
Go for it.
You good?
I'm good.
Are you sure?
I am sure.
Okay. Today we're talking about access control cards, the good, the bad, the clonable. Brief bio of myself. Most of you know I am VP of Consulting at Secure States, recovering penetration tester. Interests include things like wireless, penetration testing, physical security. Been doing security for a while. Hosted Security Justice Podcast. Also one of the co-founders of the Cleveland chapter of Tool, which is an organization focused on locks and lockpicking. So a couple of goals for the presentation. The hope here is to provide information on weaknesses in popular access control cards. So the access and control cards you use to gain access to buildings, you go up, you swipe your ID, you run through a reader, those type of technologies. And the real key here is to provide information on the weaknesses so you can make informed decisions. A lot of these attacks I'll be talking about have been known about for a number of years. Some of them have been known about for decades. But a large number of security professionals are still not aware of them, especially when you get into the physical security community and those type of areas. So the goal is just to raise awareness so people can make informed decisions. For each attack, I outline basically the types of attacks that can be launched against these systems, as well as how complicated and expensive the attacks are. So again, if you're an organization that, let's say, handles classified work, you're probably going to have different security requirements than a company that manufactures toilet paper. So you'll be able to use that information to figure out which attacks could be leveraged against your company, to figure out which attacks you should be protecting against. I will also provide some recommendations around how to defend against these attacks. So here's a picture of a typical access control system. I just came back from a 3-martini lunch, evidently, as I tried to swipe my ID to get into the building. The key here is you have a card reader here, a panel which actually interacts with the card reader and the door lock. So when the person swipes their card, number gets sent to the panel. The panel then determines if that person has access to the door, and that access is actually programmed through a access control system of some sort, so a centralized system. Now the key here is, with this type of system, there are actually a large number of different attack points that can be leveraged to attack these systems. You can attack the card itself, so try to clone and manipulate the card. You can attack the reader itself, in this case, taking the reader off the wall, accessing the network connection there, network in this case being usually serial lines. Load malicious firmware onto the readers, reprogram the readers, those type of things. Access to lines that actually send the data traffic back and forth. Access to lines that activate the lock. Access the panel itself. The lines that communicate between the panel, the access control system, the access control system itself. So there are numerous attack points that can be leveraged to attack these systems. This talk is only going to focus on attacking the cards themselves, so a very specific portion of that, because the other parts could easily go into more depth. What's your question, John?
I was just going to mention the door and the actual latch itself, which is usually the easiest.
Yeah, I mean, there are tons of different areas of opportunity here where a bad guy could attack the system. When we talk about types of attacks, we generally talk about 3 types of attacks. First is reading a card, simply the ability for an attacker to read information that's on the card, figure out what information is stored on that card. Second is cloning the card. So once an information has been read, is it possible for the attacker to make a card that to the system appears to be the same card? And then finally, manipulating data on the card. So not only being able to read the data, but actually manipulate it before it's fed back into the system. Any questions on the types of attacks? Pretty general, pretty basic stuff. Then we get into attack ratings. Cost is the approximate cost needed to perform the attack. And note when I list attack complexity and cost here, I'm going with the simplest attack, that's the lowest cost. Then the complexity rating, which this is admittedly a work in progress, is 3 levels, low, medium, and high. Low is basically something that requires minimal skills. Generally it's automated, and there are tools out there that are readily available to implement these attacks. Medium attacks, not fully automated, but tools and hardware exist that can be obtained, but they may not be simple to use. This could be cases where there are proof of concepts that work but may not work reliably 100% of the time, those type of items. But generally the attack details are fully public. Then there's a high level where the attacker has to have very specific knowledge and skills. In order to perform these attacks, they often require the attacker to make their own tools, use things like custom coding, those type of examples. So with that, we'll get into the different types of access control cards and related attacks. First type of card is a card that's called a weekend card. These type of cards are ones where you actually swipe them through a reader. In this case, the card number is encoded into the card by magnetic wires. So you swipe it like a credit card through a reader, but when you look at it, there's no black strip on the back that a credit card has. These are mainly used in legacy systems. I don't see really anybody implementing these today, but you'll see them around because people have these already existing in their environment. And the key is the weekend strips actually encode a card number onto the card, and that swipe that number sent to the system to identify the user to see if they have access to the building. And no additional information can be encoded onto the card. It's just a number. Here's what a normal weekend card looks like. When you hold it up to strong light, you'll actually see the data in there, which is interesting as you get into being able to decode that. You basically have a bunch of up and down or ones and zeros. So attacks against the cards, reading the cards, is actually a low cost attack. Basically requires a bright light that allows you to see the wires through the card. Medium complexity, if you read the wires, the up-down, it actually translates to weekend traffic itself, and you can then use that to decode the numbers on the card. So you can actually look at that and figure out what numbers are actually encoded on the card simply by reading it. Again, there are no pre-made tools to do this, requires some skill, so it's a medium reading. Cloning cards, fairly cheap because you can get extra cards on eBay, other places. Going price for a weekend card these days is around $10. Complexity is high though because it's a very manual process. And basically you take the card, soak it in acetone or another substance, where it actually causes the plastic to split apart, open up the card, take out the weekend wires and rearrange them. And then usually tape over it and then swipe it through the system. This is an attack that I've seen claims of that can be performed online. I've heard reputable people that I trust say they've been able to perform the attack. I've not actually been able to replicate it because you do need to line up things pretty precisely, which is again why the complexity level is high. Manipulating a card is basically the same attack, but instead of putting the data back in the same order, you can easily encode any card number you wanted onto the card itself by just rearranging the pattern of the wires. Magnetic stripe cards, most people are familiar with these. Credit cards, basically you swipe the card through a reader. In this case, that black strip on back is usually comprised of up to 3 stripes of data, labeled track 1, 2, or 3. Same exact technology used by ATM cards and credit cards. There are standards around these things which most access control systems follow. So standard 3 tracks and the way data is encoded onto the card. There are high security cards available which use custom encoding and basically have varying degrees of success. Some of the high security cards I've seen, all that they've done is they've taken track 1 and moved it to the position of track 2. So if you just take a normal card and shave it down or add a little piece onto it, you can move it up and down to get the track in the right location. Other ones will actually use custom encoding to make it more difficult to interpret. Reading these, pretty simple, $20. You can buy the parts from any good electronic store to build a reader. This is a simple reader that uses a program called StripeStube, which is an open source magstripe reader. Cloning cards is a little bit more difficult. Costs around $40 to get a device that can be used to clone cards. In this case, you're also, one note here is if someone is using encryption or other types of technology, the card can still be cloned because you're just taking bit 1 from card and putting it onto the other card. So you don't actually need to be able to decode the data to copy the card. You're just doing a straight copy across. So in this case, encryption and standard data formats don't actually provide any protection against cloning the card itself. Once someone gets access to a cloner, which can usually range around $40 to be able to obtain. This is an example of a actually magstripe card emulator that is not making a new card, but they actually use an iPod to emulate the card itself. They make a reader, they basically swipe the card, and the traffic that goes in, you'll actually hear an audible signal. As they play that back through the iPod through the special device they made, it will actually send the same signals that will activate the reader to send the data. There are a wide range of interesting magstrip cloners that are out there people have made. I mean, iPod is one example. Next up, another device that takes it a little bit further. Be able to actually manipulate the data, you need to spend more money. In this case, you need something that won't just replay what it has, but can actually adjust the data, adjust the format, and then play it back. A note here, this is where manipulating encrypted or custom formats can be difficult unless you know how to break that encryption. Most of the time, the encryption we've seen in these systems is pretty poor, not really encryption, so that's not that difficult. But here's an example of a device where you can find plans online. It actually has a little piece of metal coming out. You stick it onto the card reader head, type in the numbers you want on the keyboard, hit go, it sends that card number to the system, and in this case you can see the door unlocks. This they have plans for it online, costs around $75 to make. Pretty nifty little device for being able to inject custom strings into a card reader. There are high security features on magstrip cards to look at. Common one is track offset, where I mentioned they actually just move the track to a slightly different position on the card. Those are fairly easy to defeat. The more common one that we'll find is what's called MFM encoding. Most cards use F2F encoding, which may not show up super well, but basically when you map the tick to duration on a graph, you find two distinct streams that apply with F2F, which is the standard encoding. With M2F encoding, you actually get 3 stripes, and it's just a different way of encoding the data. The key here is that most card readers themselves will not actually decode M2F data, or MFM data. There is a product out there called MaxStripe, which runs around $450. It's a card reader that can actually read the data. It cannot actually write the data in that format, though, but you could extract the data from the system. So moving out of the world of old school cards, you actually have to swipe them through the reader. We'll move into proximity cards, which are most of the cards people are familiar with today. These are ones where you wave them in front of the reader and the door magically opens up. There are 2 general classes of cards there, low frequency and high frequency. We'll deal with low frequency cards first. Low frequency and proximity cards operate on the 125 kilohertz frequency, and these are simply memory cards that when you swipe them from a reader, the card just spits out a string of numbers. The reader looks at a string of numbers to determine if that person has access. The key here is with low frequency cards, communications are not authenticated in any manner. The card does not authenticate the reader does not authenticate the card. You walk past any reader that's compatible with the card, and it will basically be able to read the number off the card, and then the system can figure out what to do with that number. So pretty low security items. Common low frequency cards, HID prox cards are probably the most common, which these guys might look familiar. They're probably among one of the more popular access control cards in the US. They're starting to become less popular as they're moving into high frequency cards, but these guys are everywhere. Indala is a high security version of HID prox cards. In a sense, use similar technology, but they do some basically Captain Crunch level of encoding to make it so that the card number is encrypted. And then there are EM cards, or if you have a card that is a low frequency card that isn't labeled HID or has no name on it, you go to some Chinese company and buy up 50 cards, and you buy up some cheap readers from them. Most likely they're EM cards. Basically simple memory cards where when it is presented to a reader, it just spits out again a set text number. Generally, these are no labeled. If you have any cards that are for small buildings, gyms, parking garages, are probably EM cards. Reading low frequency cards tends to be fairly inexpensive. $50 will get you a reader that can read the cards, and there are tools readily available to do it, so it's pretty low complexity. One note is for both HID cards and Indala cards, the actual card number that matches the card number on the back that's transmitted, there's a very simple little data switching that goes on. So there's minimum levels of security there, but there are programs out there that will do that conversion for you. Key here is you also need direct access to the card, or you do not necessarily need direct access to the card to clone it. These cards, readers are spec'd to read them from anywhere from a couple inches up to 2 feet away. So they make commercial readers mainly designed for like parking garages, which factory spec is they'll operate from 2 feet away. So you do not need to actually get physical control on these cards to clone it. You just need to get within 2 feet of somebody with a large enough antenna. And those antennas are actually pretty small. They're like yay big. Side project I have is actually taking one of those and building it into a suitcase so I can just walk around and gather stuff up when we need tests. Cards, depending on the card technology, can be pretty simple. HID cards cost around $200 to get a cloner for it. There are plans that exist online where you could build parts for as low as $20. A lot of them, though, require a pretty significant amount of electrical experience to be able to solder it together. There are also commercial products underway to make cloners that would be in a $50 price range. So $200 is the current easy to obtain price. If you're crafty, you can get it for less, and I suspect in a year or so the price will get considerably cheaper. Invalid cards are far more expensive to be able to clone. The only device I know that can clone is the Proxmark 3, which is the device that I use here for this type of research. And it's key to note that Indala's Flex security that they add to the card doesn't actually protect the card from cloning because you don't actually need to decode the string to be able to clone it. You just need to be able to play back the string to the system.
So the only thing that secures you from is somebody having a picture of the number on the card?
Yeah. Yeah, they have a picture of the number of the card, or if you want to change the card number, that would be another area that'd be protected from. EM cards can be quoted for around $70. Someday I'll buy. Usually appear on Deal Extreme. The best part is that all the writing in it is in Chinese. And pretty simple stuff of put card here, press this button. But they make EM card cloners you can get for around $70, where you put the card onto it, hit the clone button, take it off, and then it comes with a pack of other cards. Put that card onto it, hit program, and it programs it. So really, the security protections there are pretty poor. Other folks have actually made more advanced devices. This was a Proxmark cloning device made that first publicly announced back in 2003. The first time these devices were publicly spoken about was 2001, I believe it was, or 2002, at the Hackers on Planet Earth conference. Delchi demoed one that he had created. So this attack has been known about for almost a decade at this point, and if you go and talk to HID about if this is possible, they would probably still say no. Or they'll just try to sell you a different card technology. But a lot of physical security people don't know that this attack exists, despite the fact it's been around for a long time. So with that, owning HID prox cards. So here we have a system set up. This guy's just a power supply. This can support up to like 5 readers because this is what my basement looks like. Since I have just about every major reader in some sort of test format. This is the access control panel, so this is the brains that gets programmed what cards are allowed in. Reader, and when the light goes on, the door gets unlocked. So a valid person comes up, flips their card, door unlocks. Invalid card comes up, swipes the card, light turns green, read the card, system goes, nope, you're not allowed in, does not allow you into the door. So cloning one of these cards, and this is a bit longer process. We're actually automating all this stuff because this tool has a Python interface. So in this case, I'll just tell the reader to go into, basically start looking for HID cards that are in the area. Card comes into range, and we get the card number. Now for this, the card number is only of it, it's just checksum value. So I'll take that. Restart the card reader. Come back online, connect it up. Tell it to simulate a tag. Tell it to simulate the tag number. Take up the little numbers there, and now this little guy is now transmitting to this antenna, saying, "Hey, I'm this card, I'm this card, I'm this card." Go up, and door unlocks. So pretty simple stuff. The other neat thing about this card number here itself, you can get into brute forcing card numbers. So if you get one card to a facility, there's a definite pattern that occurs, so you can just start incrementing up and down if you come to a door you don't have access to. And for folks here that do know the physical security layout of their facility, how many of them are actually looking for bad card reads on readers? My guess is nobody. Very few places I've seen do that. Other interesting thing, there is actually a pattern, if people come up later on I can show it to you, where basically the card number itself is made up of two components. A site code, which should be the same for everybody that's at that same site, and then individual card numbers. So once you get a code, you pull out the site code, you know that's going to be the same for every single card there, so you now need to increment a, let's see, 5-digit number. These also tend to follow certain patterns. You can find the start of the company's number block. Usually the first 1 to 5 cards put into the system are test cards. So we've actually had luck of being able to figure out what the first number block was, programming that in, and then you have a card which was given access to the whole building when it was made to test all the readers and stuck in a drawer somewhere and forgotten about. The best part there is when they look up the card record, they're like, why is test card 3 going
Or it could be head of security gets the first card in the
Yeah.
box and...
Generally, the lower number of cards, you can find the first few cards that come out of the box, which is not that difficult to find when you start looking at the numbers and knowing how HID packages these things. So that can be of value as well. And this device here can actually operate without a laptop. It's easier to use the laptop, but you can just operate the battery pack as well. There are also ways to automate it.
Could you do it off, say, a PDA or an Android device?
I was going to say it's Python scripting, so...
Yeah, I'm sure that you could. Anything that can act as a USB host is fine. So depending on the the Android phone or whatnot. So there's the fun with cloning cards. Manipulating low frequency cards. The cheapest device I have to manipulate low frequency cards is the Proxmark 3 device, which actually now that we're done with the demo, I'll hold it up. This is the device itself, and then the antenna. This is the high frequency or low frequency antenna. Then there's also a high frequency antenna as well. And this is a commercially available product. So Proxmark 3 can card data itself. The Indala Flux Secure, there's no public programs to manipulate it, but there have been research papers that publish the encryption algorithm they use, but they have not actually implemented it. So if someone actually had the time, I'm sure they could put it together, and Indala is used so frequently now that you're kind of entering into security through obscurity with their product line. With that wraps up low-frequency cards, get into high-frequency cards. This is where you get into what are referred to as contactless smart cards, because these cards actually have some intelligence built into them. So it's no longer, I see a reader, I'm just going to barf out a card number. They actually do, they can do authentication, you can do curses, so you can have something where the reader comes into play. The reader, looks at a count on the card, has some sort of digital purse. This can be used for things like cafeterias. There are companies where their access control cards can also be used to pay for items because there's actually separate applications on the card, separate memory blocks. You can also store biometric templates on the cards, pins, other stuff, so it's far more functional. These operate in the 13.65 megahertz band, so much higher frequency range. The two most common types of cards here are MyFair and HID I-Class. MyFair family is used to be produced by Philips. They spun it off into NXP Semiconductors. There are generally 4 types of MyFair products: the classic or standard, DesFire Plus, and Ultralight. We'll just be focusing on the classic today because that's the one that's most widely deployed. DesFire is used in some high security applications, and Plus and Ultralight are more designed for transit systems. And as far as history goes, MyFair was originally designed as a transit fare system. So you go up and swipe your card to get onto a train. That's MyFair's original use. but then it was adopted by the physical security industry as well. It is heavily used for access control outside North America. You go to basically any other country in the world, they're going to be using MyFair for access control into their buildings. Inside the U.S., that market is dominated by HID. But again, you go outside the U.S., very different. Because of this, you also find large multinational corporations. It's not uncommon for them to use MyFair inside the states, so their ID cards will work across all their facilities throughout the world. With MyFair, key point is there are two operating modes, a UID mode and a cryptographic mode. And the security of the card highly depends on which operating mode is being used. UID mode, the card basically acts as a low frequency card. Card comes in near a reader. Reader basically is broadcasting out, any card send me your UID. Card says, hey, there's a reader, here's my UID. Sends across a number. There is no mutual authentication, there is no encryption, it's simply sending across a string. System looks at that string, verifies it as access. The interesting thing is this is a surprisingly popular deployment where we have seen sites that have all the technology to go with a higher security option, but for whatever reason are operating their card system in UID mode. Attacks against UID mode, reading a card, just need to get a reader. They're commercially available readers for about $200, medium complexity there. Again, there are plans that exist online that could allow you to build your own reader for around $50. And this talk is originally geared more towards physical security professionals, so I was assuming they weren't going to go out, get components, and solder them up themselves. And also for an actual criminal to be attacking you, $200 versus $50 is a pretty small differentiator. Again, physical access to card is not required. You just need to get within close proximity of the card. The other interesting thing is beware of other applications that use the UID of the card, because you could have different security levels using the UID. So an example that we actually ran into at a building was card system was in UID mode to gain access to the building, but the UID was also used for the cafeteria, and the UID was printed on all the cafeteria receipts. So to gain access to valid UIDs for the building, you just need to hang outside, and when someone would go outside with their lunch on a nice day and throw out their receipt, you just go grab the receipt and literally have the number on it that you need to program into the system to emulate that person's card. So little things like that can really mess you up.
How are people that stupid? It boggles the mind.
Probably because the people that were doing, well, we'll get later on, we've actually run into cases where the system integrator swears up and down they're not using UID, they're using the secure option, and they're not, because the integrators do not know. Because again, most of the integrators that deal with these products don't actually understand these nuances of the security of them.
That's
so
not the only type of product that's like that.
Yeah. So it could be a case where they didn't think there was a problem with the UID on the receipt because they thought that the building system was using the digital purses or whatnot. Or just, you have two groups inside. This is a large company, access control group, uses the UID, that's now sensitive data. Someone else, hey, it'd be really sweet if we could, buy Cokes and, go to the cafeteria and use our cards there. We'll just use the UID and not really realizing that,
It's like Social Security card numbers.
Yeah. I mean, who knows how that occurs, but it occurs fairly frequently. The encryption, MyFair cryptographic mode, yeah.
Do colleges, are a lot of colleges using the MyFair cards for their
In the
system?
States, no. I'd be surprised in the States if a college is, but it's possible. Outside the States, most definitely. I mean, literally outside the States, if you see someone who has an access control card or they go up to the building to get in, most likely that's a MyFair card. Inside the States, most likely it's an HID card. So it depends on geographic location. Only time I've ever seen MyFair deployed inside the U.S. is multinationals, where they wanted to make sure their access control card would work outside the country. So that way they have the same card across the footprint, and just sourcing MyFair parts are much easier to source across the country. Or if it's a foreign company that started outside the U.S., they're not going to go into the U.S. market and switch over to a new card format that's only in the U.S. Yeah.
Yeah, was it Boston's transit system that was using MyFare? Because MyFare at NXP just suddenly jumped into my head when you said that.
Yeah, a lot of the transit systems are using MyFare. HID is just starting to get into transit, but for transit operations, a lot of them are using MyFare inside the U.S.
Do you know what RTA uses?
No. If anybody has any old cards they don't want, I'd love to play with them.
They're still using a derivative mag stripe, and then they also have a backup of the information printed on the card.
Okay, so it's magstripe.
Yeah, it's usually mag stripe with a human element backup.
Okay.
I have a magstripe reader if anybody wants to play around that also.
One interesting thing though with RTA cards, if anyone remembers, there was an old Metro card problem where if they creased,
Yeah.
I heard from someone that accidentally happened to their card and it keeps working over and over again.
You can also make your own mag stripe reader.
Yeah.
There are ways to deal with a cassette tape player and hook it up to the headphone jack, or no, the line-in jack on your computer. Headphone, or a Walkman.
You take a
You gotta
8-track
find a Walkman.
and
Oh, that I have.
yes.
Yeah, an 8-track. That's
So with MyFare in the encryption mode, in this case, there is actually mutual authentication that occurs between the card and the reader. It's interesting when you're in cryptographic mode, it actually sends the ID first as part of handshake, and then it goes into establishing mutual authentication, then we'll send the information. Security of this relies on the encryption algorithm and the secrecy of the encryption keys. It does use a proprietary encryption algorithm, so folks in the room can guess how well that worked out for them. And then data is stored on sectors in the card, so once authentication's occurred, the reader can then say, I want to get the data from sector blah. That data is sent over, it then compares that number with the system to see if they have access. Each sector is actually protected by 2 encryption keys, an A and B key. They're only 48-bit keys, and a single card may have multiple A and B keys. So, 48-bit keys and a proprietary encryption algorithm, you guys can probably already guess where this is going. A bunch of crazy Germans decided that they wanted to actually reverse engineer the algorithm. So literally in their kitchen, and they have great photos of this, they took an HID or a MyFare chip, which is your typical actual microchip, 4 millimeters across or so, or 5 millimeters across, and actually polished off the top of the chip to the point where it was actually exposing beads on the chip itself, put it underneath a microscope with a USB camera hooked up, took a picture of it, and proceeded to then hand polish through the different layers of the chip until it got to the logic gate. Then they wrote a program that would take these images and actually go, that looks like an AND gate, that looks like an OR gate, and here are how all the connections work. And we're actually able to then have this computer program reverse the algorithm based off of the chip itself. It was a pretty neat little endeavor of literally these guys, I think they used toothpaste as the polish, literally in their kitchens polishing down these chips to get this. And it took them quite a bit of time. But with this, they were able to discover how the Crypto 1 algorithm works, and for all intents and purposes, the algorithm is broken. I could spend an hour listening to different attacks against it. But just thought it was just interesting, as you know. I'm amazed by what people will do in their free time, so this is coming from someone that builds this type of stuff in their basement. So obtaining MyFare encryption keys, one problem is default encryption keys are commonly used. When you get MyFare cards and readers, they have default encryption keys on them. Those keys are very, very well known. A large number of facilities don't bother to change them. So yes, there is encryption, but it's not really doing anything. If they do use custom keys, encryption keys, it can be obtained if you intercept the conversation between the card and reader, simply communicate with the card itself, or simply communicate with the reader. So basically, if you have any part of the equation, you can recover the encryption keys. The entire process, once you capture that handshake to recover the keys, takes under 10 minutes using a standard desktop. And this isn't using anything like CUDA acceleration. And that 10 minutes was actually at this point from a number of years ago, so my phone is potentially fast enough to do that in 10 minutes now. Commercial cost to do this with commercial hardware, $200. Cost with homebrew hardware, about $1,000. Complexity is to level 2, because there aren't point-and-click tools, but the tools that out there do actually exist. Reading cryptographic cards in cryptographic mode. Once you have to have the encryption keys first to perform the attacks. Again, a lot of people just use default encryption keys, so that makes it easier. You do need physical access to the card. Again, is not required. It's going to be the read range. And read range can be increased again by using amplifiers, antennas. Cost about $50. Manipulating cards, around $100. Most access control systems also simply store a string of numbers on the card, so it's pretty easy to just start manipulating that string of numbers. And plans are readily available online to allow advanced attackers to build their own hardware that can clone and manipulate the cards themselves. Key here is, how do you know which format your MyFair system is using, if anyone in this group actually has a MyFair system. You can ask the integrator or vendor. As I mentioned, a surprising number do not know, or will give you incorrect information. So really the best method is just to test your system. I would not trust, unless I had a really good relationship with an integrator or vendor, their response on that, just from what I've seen with talking to clients in the wild. With that, that wraps up the standard used in all the rest of the world. Now we'll get to HID I-Class, which is pretty much the standard in the US. This is HID's primary contactless smart card product. Again, mainly used in access control systems. We're starting to see it deployed to public transit, widely deployed inside the US. If you see someone using a swipe card in the US at a corporate facility, most likely it's an HID card, because in your installation it's probably an I-Class card. These do use mutual authentication between the card and reader before any identification information is transmitted. So you don't have the problem of a UID mode and an encrypted mode. There is only an encrypted mode, which is a plus. Encryption used on the system, DES encryption is used for authentication traffic, and triple DES is used for transport layer encryption. However, they do roll in a fair number of proprietary hashing algorithms and other items, which are starting to cause them problems. So with that, basically, I-Class offers 3 levels of security, they call it, which basically comes down to how the keys are managed. And the problem is exactly what keys are managed remains unclear. Researchers have started to do a lot of digging into I-Class cards and have found that when the vendor says, we change all the keys in this setup, and they go and actually get a hold of a reader or card, they find that not all the keys have been changed. So it's interesting that the security research into the product and the vendor spec are not lining up, which makes it very difficult for us to make an accurate assessment of what's going on. First mode is the standard mode, which is the one that's used by basically every company out there. In this case, the same encryption keys for both DES and triple DES are shared across all readers and cards. So in this case, same encryption keys used. You buy an I-Class reader off the shelf. It has those standard keys in it. You buy I-Class cards off the shelf. It has same keys in it. High security mode, the client will manage their own keys and load them into the system. Elite mode is basically the same as high security mode, but HID manages the keys for you. To load keys onto I-Class readers, you get special programming cards. So elite mode, HID just sends you a bunch of programming cards. You go around, you program all the readers. High security, you actually have the chance to manage those keys yourself and load them on yourself. Some of the security concerns with I-Class. HID has not released all the encryption algorithms for public review. We're starting to see the proprietary algorithms for like hashing, key derivation coming out, and there are definitely signs there are problems in those algorithms, which is no shock. I mean, anybody that works in security knows if you try to roll your own encryption algorithm, it's not gonna end well for you. Vast majority of I-Class cards and readers use default encryption keys. So when I went to eBay and bought up a box of I-Class readers, those all contain the encryption key, which is probably used by most everybody else. Because although the systems support loading custom keys, I have found very, very few organizations that have actually been able to do that. And in fact, I've only found that implemented really government organizations. Actually worked with a company that tried to load their own keys. It was pretty funny because the vendor, charged them for the hardware, the software, and the licenses, which was something like $2 per card for this very large company, to be able to load custom keys as part of the original bid process. And when it came time to roll it out and start loading up the custom keys, they called up HID and said, hey, we purchased the software, we have these licenses. And they basically said, oh yeah, we don't really sell that to customers like you. You may be a large bank, but you don't really qualify for needing to load custom keys. So we'll just give you back that money and you can use the standard keys. So I'm not sure really how many organizations actually are using anything other than the custom keys. Again, the only places I've seen that I've been able to confirm that are government organizations. So that's interesting. In the HID documentation, basically, security researchers and the test results that I mentioned don't match up with HID's documentation. So there was a case of, I believe it's high security keys, where the documentation says both the transport and the authentication key are changed, and they found that only the authentication key was changed. So stuff like that also raises some concerns. The other key is it's possible to recover the encryption key when an attacker has physical access to a reader. So 2 years ago at the Chaos Computer Congress in Germany, researchers released the steps required to pull the keys out of a reader. So all you need to do is go up, rip a reader off a wall, and you can then pull the necessary keys out of it. And that's if they're using custom keys. If they're using the standard keys, just go to eBay, buy a reader for $5, and you can rip the keys off. The copy protection to prevent someone from pulling the keys off of the readers is the readers are actually powered by PIC chips, which are programmed with a 5-pin interface. They've switched pins 1 and 3.
Don't forget the screws on the wall.
Yeah, and there's high security screws on the wall. So they took, some pretty extreme steps to make sure it would be difficult to recover these important items. And actually this iClass section was revised, it's just recently added in these things. The default encryption keys for iClass, I highly suspect are available online if you know who to talk to. If not, you can just get a reader, because there's been a lot of research in that, and it looks like those are readily available. If not, they're easy to recover. In terms of reading standard cards or reading cards with custom keys, once you get the custom keys, all you need is a reader, which will run you around $20. Manipulating the cards is still very difficult. This hardware here has the capability of doing that, but so far no one has written a program to do that. So I'd say we're $400 for the cost, but fairly high complexity, because you need to actually have someone that can do the proper coding to be able to interact as the system itself. So still a fairly difficult attack to carry off, but possible. So with that, we'll move into some of the defenses. The first one is from a risk assessment in terms of looking at threat agents and attack vectors. As I mentioned before, depending on, we have a lot of different industries in here. If you're a local pizza chain, you probably don't have too many, your concern is not going to be a government agency which has the ability to pull off some of these more advanced attacks. If you are a defense contractor, obviously you're going to have a very different type of individual potentially targeting you. And basically deploy access control cards that fit your needs. Also deploy compensating controls to protect against any weaknesses in the system, basically based off of your likely threats and attackers. Second, consider deploying two-factor authentication, such as PIN pads or biometrics, to further validate the individual, the identity of the card holder. That can be a whole separate discussion, because with MyFair and HID iClass, you can set up so the PIN number and the biometric data is stored on the card itself or is stored in the backend system. So in this case, if you actually have a MyFair card, which is easy to manipulate, where you require fingerprint press, you swipe the card, the reader will figure out who you are, and the reader will actually request the fingerprint data from the card will send it over, then when you put your fingerprint down, it'll verify, was the fingerprint presented, the one on the card. So if you have the capabilities to rewrite the data on the card, it would be possible to basically put your fingerprint on that card with another user's user ID. Yeah.
Are there any cards available that can bypass skimming, for example, by requiring a button press on the card?
There are some technologies that do that. They're not widely deployed, and I would
I don't see any reason not to, really. I mean,
be
it's basic switch.
skeptical. I would be very cautious implementing those because a lot of them, I suspect, it's a good idea. I don't know if anyone's actually pulled it off well. Would be the way to put it. Other concern, considering you're placing your proximity cards inside anti-skimming sleeves or badges, the new government cards, which I'm blanking on the name of, that all government employees carry are actually I-class cards that have custom keys and other stuff loaded. Part of that government standard is that all those cards have to be stored inside, what do they call them, electromagnetically opaque sleeves to protect against skimming attacks. So with those, we've seen ones where there's a clamshell, you go up, you squeeze it, it opens up near the reader, it can read it. Other ones, you pull back a flap that shields the card, it can read it. But basically, these are technologies designed to make it so the cards cannot be skimmed easily unless they're near a reader and a person actually exposes the card itself. These are commercially available. They run anywhere from a few bucks up to $20 a card, up to $20 a case. Next time you're hanging around federal folks, check out the card readers. You'll notice that they're inside these very big cases, and those cases are not super big, but they're not just inside cheap little plastic cases. They're inside fairly substantial cases that actually shield the card itself from skimming. The FIPS standard around this, you look for card readers that are FIPS 201 certified. That'll get you the protections there. Now the key is most of these sleeves are only certified to protect 13.56 megahertz cards, so high frequency cards. Your mileage may vary with 120 kilohertz cards. So if you're still using old HIV cards themselves, the sleeves may or may not work with them, and basically the manufacturer will not certify they work with low frequency. But truthfully, if you're worried about skimming to that degree, it may be worthwhile to upgrade your system anyways. There are also products that, their consumer ones, Differware makes sleeves, wallets, and other stuff. So there are products out there to basically put the card in to prevent skimming as well. Other compensating controls put in place. Configure your access control system to alert when a stolen card is used. So if the user has a card lost or stolen, that should go into a special file that basically alerts when that card is used. Alert on multiple bad card reads. So if you have a door where you get X number of bad card reads a minute, let's say 5 or 2 or whatnot, that means that either the reader's broken, a user's card is broken, which are the two most likely cases, or someone's trying to brute force the system. Either way, that needs to be fixed. So it should be alerted on so that then can be investigated. Also, tie camera systems into the access control system. So if a bad card swipe occurs, the camera system in the area will alert the guard, pop up the video, see who it is, and record that video. Yeah?
Is that brute force protection usually built into the systems, or is it something that you need to get a third party or something to install? Is it just not enabled by default? Or?
That is a good question, and I'm trying to think through the cases where we've had that implemented. A third-party product has not been needed to be purchased. So there, but I don't know if it's I don't believe it's a simply check a box, make it happen. Usually, it's have a script that parses through the logs and alerts when that happens. But it would depend on the system itself. That would be one thing where an integrator could definitely answer that. Access control systems, everyone is different, and they like to make them so that they are intercompatible. So they could vary by your system, but in cases that has been implemented, we've been able to take it to the integrator, say this is what we want to have the system do, and usually pretty quickly they can activate it. Tying camera systems, saw a very neat system last week where if a user swiped their card, if a user did a card swipe that was invalid or in a door they didn't have access to, it would, in their security center, pop up a map showing the door location, picture of the individual who owns the card, so it would pull from the card database that person's picture, and a picture from the scene, so you can then figure out, is one, this person using their card, is it someone else, and do some investigation into that as well. This was a fairly high security facility, so that is not super normal.
Probably be best to do sort of a mugshot format, have the side of their face there too, in case they're turned any on the camera.
Yeah, which would be helpful. This case had the front on view, but still helpful to be able to correlate items there. Have camera coverages on all readers. The other thing, just as a side note, if you get physical access to the readers themselves, you can do bad things like recover the keys, reprogram them. So one thing to look at is, if you have a tamper switch on the readers, that tamper switch goes off. What we've generally found is if you pull the reader off a wall, if you get it back on the wall in a couple of minutes, the guards will just assume it was a glitch in the system and won't investigate what happened. So having cameras there can be helpful. Yeah, to go back to look. Okay, tamper switch was thrown, what was going on at the time. Have a method for employees to quickly report stolen cards, be able to quickly disable the cards, analyze potential of a lost card, what would be the actual damage. Some of the older systems I've seen, card is lost, you push it into the system, it won't actually push out to all the readers in a 2-hour period or so. So in that case, you need to figure out there's a 2-hour exposure window. Is that a problem or not? That's something that you need to determine based off of your risk assessment. Finally, test the system to identify vulnerabilities. These systems are usually horribly insecure, so some testing can figure out default settings, recommendations to change, to basically be able to add in additional controls. With that, thank you for your time. This is an ongoing research project. This slide deck is basically a white paper with the amount of writing that's in it. So we're actually working on getting it into a white paper and backing up some of the stuff. We're further refining the testing of what the actual attacks are. That gets back to, we have multiple card reading systems, multiple cards, so we're basically now using those to further test these items and basically provide hopefully a pretty definitive guide of weaknesses in these systems, complexity of attacks, so people actually have a useful guide to go off of. And it's also not done by a card vendor, because the card vendors have put out similar studies, but obviously their cards magically win each time. So to keep up on this, check out the Secure State blog. Also feel free to email me if you have questions, or follow me on Twitter. Occasionally I talk about security stuff.
I was just going to ask if the slide deck was available.
Yes.
A lot of the information you had was interesting.
Yeah, if people want to just email me. So the card here. Feel free to email me. I'll happily provide it. For those that saw this presentation at Summit, it's probably 90% the same. A couple of additional items in the I-class area. So any questions? Nope. Okay. Well, with that, I'll turn it back over to Chris, or we can just adjourn the meeting.
I don't have a closing slide deck because Kennedy walked off with the slides. So
there we go. Well, be sure to come out next month. We're not doing a podcast at Mavis Winkles, and I don't know of any other announcements that you should do.
Anybody have an announcement? All right.
You are doing it, or
See you
you're
in a
not
month.
doing it?
Not doing it.